from start to post-approval of the referencing application, to describe how the DMF and the ANDA review processes are related and dependent on one another, and to learn how missteps during various stages can affect the review process and possibly the timeline. A DMF is reviewed to determine if it is adequate to support a referencing application. A DMF is not approved itself, and its review timeline is interdependent on a referencing application's timeline. This is a simplified example of a Drug Master File review timeline for an original DMF referenced by an original ANDA application. In this hypothetical example, the ANDA review cycle is followed by an approval action, and all the timeline dates are met and nothing goes wrong. This original review is given the standard ANDA clock of 10 months. But you'll note that the DMF is submitted prior to this clock starting, ideally 6 months before ANDA receipt. The times marked in blue at the bottom are in the unit of months. In general, the green section of the timeline on the far left is the time at which the user fees are paid and the completeness assessment is done. The blue section represents the time that both the ANDA and the DMF are simultaneously reviewed, with multiple communications occurring between the agency and the holder and the agency and the applicant. And finally, the orange section represents the review time following approval of the ANDA application, in which an applicant can submit supplements and/or a DMF holder can submit additional amendments. For organizational purposes, we'll move through the timeline in mostly chronological order, with focusing on 3 main parts: before ANDA receipt, after ANDA receipt, and post-ANDA approval. So let's look at the time before the ANDA is submitted. The earliest part of the timeline is prior to the agency's receipt of the ANDA. We recommend that a DMF be submitted at least 6 months prior to the agency's receipt of the ANDA. This timeline should allow for the DMF to go through the proper steps to make sure that it is available for reference when the ANDA is ready to be filed. All DMFs must be submitted electronically. Successful submission allows us not only to start the DMF timeline, but also ensures us that the first cycle CA can focus on matters beyond missing ECTD sections. For more information on successfully submitting your DMF, please see the talk later this morning on managing electronic DMF submissions. The other prerequisite to starting a completeness assessment is receipt of fee payment. Both the fee and the submission have to be successfully received in order for the completeness assessment review to start. For more information on assuring that your DMF fee is successfully received, please see Hannah and Evelyn's talk later this morning on drug master files from a GDUFA user fee perspective. This talk covers the details about determining the fee amount, deadlines, and how to process. Upon completion of both the DMF submission and the DMF fee being paid, a completeness assessment can begin. Per the GDUFA commitment letter, the timeline for a completeness assessment is that 90% of Type 2 API DMFs will be CA reviewed within 60 days of the later of the date of DMF submission or the DMF fee payment date. The CA is like the application's filing review, and the reviewer is checking at this stage to make sure that everything in the CA guidance has been submitted. The outcome of the completeness assessment will be either complete or incomplete, and the DMF must have a status of complete before it can be added to the available for reference list. In order to facilitate this stage in the process and ensure that your DMF is on the available for reference list as soon as possible, a first cycle status of complete is obviously best. To help achieve a first cycle complete, please see the poster on completeness assessments that was posted on the workshop poster page. While the CA process occurs before the filing of the ANDA, it does affect the ANDA review timeline because there are some drug substance issues that can cause the ANDA to be refused to receive. These include the starting material not being acceptable or the DMF not being on the available for reference list. To address these potential RTR issues, see the previously mentioned poster as well as the presentation on starting material later this afternoon. We suggest continued communication between the DMF holder and the applicant to avoid potential delays in review processes along the way. Throughout the presentation, I've tried to point out some places where we would specifically encourage communication. After you've submitted your DMF and paid the fee, at this point, we recommend informing any referencing applicants of the combined fee submission milestone. After your DMF is deemed complete and is thus available for reference, it can be referenced by an application. However, the work on your drug master file is not done at this point. The DMF must be administratively maintained at this stage, including submission of annual reports. If this is not done, your DMF may be closed by the agency after a certain period of time. Please see the presentation directly following this one on administrative aspects of managing DMFs for how to avoid any issues that may cause your DMF to be closed. So far, we've discussed what happens before the ANDA is submitted, and now we'll move on to the time frame for this hypothetical first cycle ANDA from receipt to GDUFA date. Usually, this is a 10-month review clock as depicted here. The Drug Master File Scientific Review is initiated after the referencing application is received. There is a lot that happens between the ANDA receipt and the application's GDUFA date. It's a good idea to initiate communication between the DMF holder and the ANDA applicant right after the ANDA is received so that both parties are aware of the start of the application review clock. Please see the poster by Wei Song and Steve Kinsley, which covers the DMF timeline. Upon receipt of the ANDA and a reference to a DMF, the Division of Lifecycle API initiates a Timely Consults and Early Information Requests, or TCIR, review. This process was initiated a couple of years ago and will be discussed in more detail later this morning in the talk by Gianni Pereira. The TCIR review occurs before the full scientific review of the DMF starts. In the TCIR review, we try to identify any data that may significantly slow down the scientific review process if it is found too late in the review cycle. This TCIR evaluation is a review evaluation, and it is more in-depth than what we looked at in the Completeness Assessment stage. Any toxicological data, such as AIM studies, would need to be consulted to our colleagues in PharmTox. If we find such data, we submit it at the time of the TCIR. To help us find this information, please put all data related to impurities in Module 3, Section S.3.2. If we don't see it on TCIR review, it may not be consulted in time to meet the review due dates. For advice and information related to PharmTox review or ICH M7 analysis, please see the talks tomorrow morning. We also look for hidden facilities during the TCIR process. Hidden facilities include critical intermediate facilities and any drug substance manufacturing or testing facilities that are used in the DMF but are not reported in the 356H of the referencing application. To facilitate this facility comparison, please be sure that your Module 3, Section S.2.1 section is up to date, and inform your referencing applicants of all facilities that should be included in the 356H form. For a more detailed discussion of these facilities, please see the talk this afternoon on hidden and critical intermediate facilities. Another piece of information that we look for during the TCIR is a reference to a secondary DMF. Sometimes it's not clear that a DMF is referencing another DMF from an initial glance, and budgeting the review time for an additional DMF is essential to meeting our timelines. This is why we look for such a reference during the TCIR. If you reference a secondary DMF or DMFs, please be sure to include a copy of the Letter of Authorization, or LOA, from the referenced DMF holder, allowing you to reference their DMF. This should be included in Module 1. It is also helpful to include a reference to an intermediate DMF on the first page of Module 3, Section S.2.2 in the Manufacturing section, or a reference to a starting material DMF on the first page of Module 3, Section S.2.3, to assure that we don't miss it on our initial check. For detailed information to aid in referencing another DMF, please see the poster on secondary DMFs that was posted on our workshop page. And finally, we've recently added a starting material evaluation component to our TCIR for all original DMFs. While we look at starting material designation and the completeness assessment, we acknowledge that improper starting material designation can significantly derail a review process. This TCIR evaluation of the starting material is a scientific review evaluation, which is more in-depth and definitive than the completeness assessment look at the starting material. It helps to speed the review process, and it is very important to designate a starting material per ICHQ 11 guidelines to ensure efficient review and avoid significant delays. To learn more about starting material designation, please watch the talk on ICHQ 11 Q&A later this afternoon. Following the TCIR review of the DMF and the filing review of the ANDA, an ANDA filing decision is made at day 60 of the review clock. We do not begin scientific review beyond what we do at the TCIR stage until we confirm that the ANDA will be filed. After the filing decision, the ANDA applicant may receive an IR based on any findings in the filing review or TCIR that are applicable to the application. A facility request may be included if any hidden facilities are found. It is at this point that we recommend communication between the ANDA applicant and the DMF holder to assure that you're both up to date on the timelines. After the ANDA is filed, OPQ can initiate scientific review of both the ANDA and the DMF. The mid-cycle ANDA discipline reviews and related discipline review letters are due at the end of month 6. We aim to finish our DMF reviews 3 weeks before the mid-cycle discipline review date to encourage communication between ourselves and the other review disciplines. At this time, a CR letter would be sent if the DMF is inadequate. There are several things that you as a DMF holder can do to set yourself up for a better first cycle review outcome. Some of these things include being sure that impurities are controlled with appropriate justification. This is a big topic, and we've included many posters and presentations related to addressing impurities. And the whole Day 2 morning session is devoted to various aspects of appropriate impurity control. Also, it's important to note that validation of the DMF manufacturing process is required prior to commercialization of the drug product. And a validation summary should be provided in the DMF to help us assess justification. Dave Amsbacher's talk this afternoon discusses our review considerations for manufacturing process validation. Also, documentation of analytical methods along with appropriate verification or validation is necessary for us to assess the analysis of the drug substance. And Xinghua Wu will talk about this in detail this afternoon. DMFs that cover complex APIs often can refer to product-specific guidances, but Bob Hu's talk this afternoon and all the posters linked to Day 1 on specific API types will provide further guidance on how to address a complex API in a DMF submission. And finally, avoiding common issues in your DMF Scientific submission will likely result in a more favorable outcome for your DMF. Wei Lu's talk in the afternoon of day 2 will cover common pitfalls that could derail your timeline. After the scientific review of a first cycle DMF, we in most cases issue a CR letter at the mid-cycle of the ANDA timeline. We encourage DMF holders to respond to the CR letter within 30 days. The reason for this is that we aim to complete a second cycle review of the DMF prior to the GDUFA action date of the referencing application. In an ideal situation, we would receive the response to CR within 30 days of the CR letter being sent so that we could start our second cycle of the DMF review in enough time to send an IR if necessary, and still provide our assessment and outcome to OPQ in time for OPQ to prepare and provide their overall review outcome to OGD. So working backward from the GDUFA date, the OPQ review outcome is due to OGD 2 weeks before the GDUFA date, and the DMF review is due 3 weeks before that. Overall, we find that effective communication between a DMF holder and the agency and the DMF holder and the ANDA can contribute to better overall review outcomes. We discussed communication strategies later this morning, as well as in 2 posters given by Fatima Sequeira and Ben Danso. If the DMF in our example becomes adequate for the first time, the DMF holder receives a first adequate or FA letter about 30 days after the review is completed. Each DMF receives only one FA letter during its lifetime, and the purpose of this letter is to inform the holder of this important milestone. We recommend communication between the DMF holder and all applicants at the receipt of the FA letter. After an application's action, if the DMF is adequate, it will receive a no further comments letter or NFC letter. This letter is received for every referencing application. We recommend that the ANDA applicant and the DMF holder be in communication with one another during this whole process. The importance of communication is underscored by the result of submitting an unsolicited amendment to the DMF right before the OPQ action. In this example, the DMF holder was not aware of the ANDA timeline and did not realize that it was headed toward approval with a goal date about a month away. And the DMF holder submitted an unsolicited amendment. This unsolicited amendment must be reviewed in order for the approval action to occur. The unsolicited amendment then triggered an extension of the GDUFA date, pushing it back by about 2 months to allow for the DMF amendment review. Overall, we suggest that statuses be shared between applicant and holder, and some suggested time points for communication are shown here and throughout the presentation. For more information on communication strategies, please see the poster presentation posted on our workshop poster page. Coming back to our simplified timeline, the DMF in our example was deemed adequate and the ANDA was approved. So we'll turn our attention to the post-approval timeline. As I mentioned earlier, a DMF holder will receive an NFC letter about a month after the approval action. At this point, it's important to continue to maintain your DMF. Annual reports and any administrative changes should be provided in order for your DMF to remain open. Any changes that you make to your process should be updated in your DMF via an amendment, and data should be provided to justify these changes. For more information on suggested documentation and supporting data, please see Brian Connell's presentation tomorrow afternoon, as well as the FDA draft guidance for industry on this topic. As you can see from our hypothetical timeline that we've walked through, there are many steps in this process, and with any multi-step process, big benefits can be seen from increased efficiency and timeliness. We've talked about what DMF holders and ANDA applicants can do to positively affect this process. And now I'd like to discuss some recent steps that we've taken to improve the efficiency of our DMF review process. CASA, which stands for Knowledge Aided Assessment and Structured Application, involves the use of a more structured review template and submissions and has been recently developed for drug substance review. It will improve our review efficiency and will be discussed in more detail in tomorrow afternoon's session. ANDA-aligned teams were implemented last year to align a smaller number of reviewers from each discipline with a project manager and application technical lead to improve communication within OPQ and further enhance our mission of one quality voice. Please see Steve Kinsley's poster presentation on ANDA-aligned teams for more information on this initiative. We also have many initiatives with the Office of Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Assessment in order to promote and improve our communications between our organizations. These include the TCIR, which I mentioned earlier and will be discussed later today, formatting of our reviews so that it's more accessible to OPMA reviewers to find what they need more easily. And also, we have a working group that we just started to prepare drug substance reviewers for inspection in collaboration with OPMA. Form 3938, which is similar to the 356H for an application, will allow us to more easily pull information into FDA databases from a DMF submission, and it will enhance the accuracy and efficiency in processing drug master file submissions. And finally, we're constantly monitoring our progress and productivity within our division. Please see the poster by Steve Kinsley and Wei Song on this effort. I hope that this presentation has allowed you to gain a better understanding of the FDA's review of Type 2 drug master files within the division of Lifecycle API. We discussed the process from receipt of DMF through the Completeness Assessment review. We also discussed the timeline and review process as it relates to the referencing application, and we touched on what happens post-approval. We learned of the importance of communication between the DMF holder and the ANDA applicant, and also some things that could derail a review process. We also discussed what the agency is doing to improve the review process. And finally, we talked about where to go for more information about any part of this process which you'd like to learn more about. Thank you so much for attending my talk. I'd like to thank my colleagues listed here for their input and help leading up to this presentation. After this presentation, if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen so that we can address them during the scheduled question and answer panel after this session. If you have a question on this presentation after the workshop is over, send them to the email address provided here by March 19th for inclusion in the follow-on webinar on April 9th. Next up, we have a presentation by Vatsala Selvam on administrative aspects of managing a DMF. Vatsala is a technical information specialist in the division of Lifecycle API, where she manages administrative aspects of DMF submissions. Vatsala is an essential member of the DLAPI staff and has taken the lead on various projects and assignments. She acts as a liaison between DMF data entry staff, FDA reviewers, and industry on inquiries related to administrative portions of DMF submissions. She performs administrative review on various submissions, drafts correspondence letters to DMF holders and their responsible agents, as well as verifies that DMF submissions are administratively complete prior to quality review. Please welcome Vatsala Selvam.